I've officially hit record, so now we can slip into our.
We are sort of getting going. Yes,
that's right,
yes.
and it's nice. I say today we're going to have some fun because one, it's our spring break at the moment.
Yes.
So we're going to take that in stride.
A little bit more laid back.
Yeah.
So actually, the reason you can tell, so my students will get this, nobody else will, and they'll only get it if they're watching the video. I do not have my black T-shirt on, so the rule is I always wear black when I'm working, and today it's not.
That's right. It's dark, but it is not black.
Right.
I actually do like the color.
It's like a nice teal color. Yes.
It's a nice dark teal.
Yes.
I like that. And obviously, if you
it's my spring break outfit.
And I'm like,
I just changed the T-shirt.
I didn't realize I'm kind of wearing mine's more traditional blue, but and the camera kind of looks the same. So we'll see. We're I can pretend we're twinning today for fun, but. Yeah, I appreciate that any shade of teal, because if you look at any of the Modem Futura stuff, you can see I have
Modem Futura colors.
That's right.
Yes.
That's right. We need T-shirts or something. I think, or some kind of cool swag. I don't know. I'll have to work on that. Okay. So let me throw this out because. We talked, I don't know how many episodes back now this was, where I talked about my defense against the dark arts.
Yes.
Of falling victim to the reality distortion field of buying all the new.
And I'm putting a pause on buying stuff before you just go full in.
Yes. I will say this is now you can see it play out in real time. Did you happen to notice, or did you catch wind of any of the new Apple announcements that happened? I think they happened last week, actually. So beginning of March.
Yep.
So my defense is in full swing right now.
What are you resisting, Sean?
And so I'll go through this because this is pretty entertaining. So I'm living.
You didn't resist with the Apple Vision Pro, I must confess.
Well, yeah. Well, to be fair, it was out for a while before I was able to get my hands on one. But this is, again, this has been, from the time we're recording, it's been like less than a week since these products were announced. So I'm in my full, sit, don't do anything silly here, Sean. But they came out with there was an iPad announcement that I didn't really pay much attention to, but two new computers came out. The first just being the new MacBook Air with the M4. And so this is like their low end MacBook Air. It's one of the most, I think they never share the breakout numbers, but I'm pretty sure it's probably their top selling laptop that Apple makes, because it is the most affordable as well. The reason I bring it up, one is because I'm like,
because you're feeling in a geeky mood today.
Yeah. I'm like,
this is a little geeky, but yeah.
And it's like it's spring break. I'm going to talk computers. We don't get to talk about computers enough these days. But what's really exciting about it is it's coming out, of course, now. But I'm like, this, if you're in the market, I will say this is probably the one, because it's on the M4. So it's a brand new processor. Okay. It's super awesome in that sense. But they've been able to get it back to the sub $1,000 mark.
Okay, yep.
So for people who are like going into school, going to like graduation, things are coming up. Sean needs a new, couch.
We are not sponsored by Apple, by the way.
Even with repeated attempts. No, not at all. But again, we are available. We are available for sponsorship. But it is a wonderful machine, because people ask all the time, what computer should I get? Well, they ask me, I get this all the time. What computer should I get? And normally it's this back and forth of, well, how do you use it? Let me know. Sure. But I'm like, this new one, the base model, the reason it's important too is it comes with 16 gigs of RAM, which is important because this machine will last 7 years, without probably breaking a sweat. So I get nothing from it.
I've got to ask you this.
Yep.
Do you need a new laptop, Sean?
No, I do not. I do not need
Resist. Yes.
But boy, I don't know. Okay. So So moving on, there's one more that I want to talk about, because it actually has some interesting, especially for AI.
Yep.
Right. So they also kind of sort of dropped the new update to the Mac Studio, which, if you're not familiar, it's basically
it's the super duper expensive sort of desktop thingamajig.
Yes. It's not the Pro, which that has its own issues of whether that's ever been we could talk about that at a different time, but it's the Mac Studio. So it's almost like, if you think about what it looks like, it's kind of this big, thick, double iMac type enclosure. But so they came with new updates for it. So it's interesting. So it has an M4 Max chip but also this M3 Ultra chip. So which isn't, you were expecting M4. But the reason that's important, and this gets really geeky, and I will drop some links so people who are asking for more of this know where to go.
The 0.1% of all listeners who actually find this interesting.
For everyone else whose eyes are glazing over, just trust me, this is really cool. So what was exciting about the Ultra, though, is what this is. So a great technology analyst, Ben Thompson from Stratechery, he was one who kind of put it out there as well, that this particular new model of this Ultra is essentially today probably the biggest or most powerful consumer grade computer you can get for running local AI models.
Oh, interesting.
On your device. Okay. So thinking about, so not ChatGPT, but thinking about if you want to download things like the open weight things like Llama or DeepSeek.
Right. Yes.
That you want, because this new M3 Ultra, right? So it has up to 80 GPU cores on it, which is, I mean, it's insane.
Remember the days when you had one, maybe two?
Oh, yeah. Up to 512 gig of RAM. So almost a half a terabyte. So anyway, so these things.
I've got to say at this point, anybody who's listening, you've got to go and watch the video and just watch Sean's body language.
I'm coming out of my chair. So this is where this is where my defense is really holding strong, right? Yeah. So because these machines, so the M4 version, I mean, these things, and again, price for these things starting at just under $2,000. And the reason that is what I did too, because I knew, I'm like, people are gonna be like, yeah, but Sean, that's ridiculous, right? But it's not. So let me just put it out there. Again, I got a kind of nostalgia for computing a little bit too. So for comparison, okay, going way back. So 1977, the Apple II.
Yes.
Right? 4 kilobits. Kilobits of RAM. For at the time, just under $1,300 US, which according to the adjustment for inflation, today's equivalent of 2024 anyway, would have been just over $6,700. Right? Yeah. And the reason I went back to this era to get some of these dates is, back, late 70s, early 80s, this is a transformative time in personal computing. Not for everyone at the time, right? You had to really be an enthusiast or really invested into it, because they were incredibly expensive by comparison. And so then again, Apple IIe, which is that's my Apple of origin that I think of. 1983, 64 kilobits of RAM that could be expandable to 1 megabyte. Right. Right. Again, $1,300 equivalent to $4,400. Right. And then the Apple Macintosh, the 128K.
Yes.
This first.
Yes.
Yeah. Is this yours?
I never actually owned one, but actually it was the successor to that I wrote my whole dissertation on, the Mac SE.
Nice. Yes, the SE. I didn't put that one in here, but I'll let somebody else look that one up. But the Macintosh 128K, so this is one of the first like all-in-ones, basically, right? At the time in 1984, $2,500, which equivalent today is $7,600, right? 128K, that's where it gets its name from, of RAM. Using the Motorola 68, the famous 6800 processor, that had storage with 400 kilobyte floppy disk drive.
Yes.
Right? So just,
Well, actually, I bought my first Mac in 1992, but before then I was using the all-in-one sort of Macs where everything was on floppies. They didn't actually have a hard drive at all.
There was no
everything. The operating system, all your files, the word processor, everything was on that one floppy.
Everything, and it would just hold things in RAM when you switched disks, and it was like, it was. I mean, I just suddenly got the nostalgic chills for just the floppy, the old, like the 5 1/4.
Well, I can even up the nostalgia. So I was writing my dissertation 1991 to 1992 on one of these old Macs.
Oh my gosh.
So everything on the 1.4 meg floppy disk. And the graphics and the word processing were perfect. I could do anything and everything on that. And I have never had a work experience quite as good as those days on a computer.
Oh, you don't still have that by chance, do you?
No.
Oh, I know.
I have nothing. But I have all the stuff. I have the original printouts of my dissertation, including all of the graphics.
That's cool. That's really fun.
Yeah.
So, I'm like, I start going back to, and I'm like, there's so many good like just that old. I remember just goofing around. But Oregon Trail too on the original. I'm playing, all the way back to the Apple IIe because that's what our libraries had. Right. Oh, such a good experience.
We've somehow got to pull ourselves out of this nostalgia sort of whirlpool and
I know.
get back on
well,
track.
we'll go way forward. But again, the reason I was pulling this up, and one of the things that has me so you can literally feel me jumping out of my seat practically over this new Mac Studio, though, is what you might be able to do with the potential for putting this thing in your home, if you're your organization, your school, whatever, if you want to be working locally with, of course, production stuff. You've got these GPUs, they can do all kinds of cool things, but specifically the AI intensive models hit those GPU cores. Yes. And of course, in the silicon, really nerdy deep dive at some point would be to look at the comparison between the Apple Silicon developments along with NVIDIA's chip developments, because what they're able to do there with like these neural cores, I mean, just incredible. But like with the Apple Silicon, that same chip also has 32 neural engine cores built into it. So these things are essentially purpose built for, in some ways, for doing these AI. But what was cool is I remembering back when we were talking, it was just at the beginning of the year, NVIDIA had released a press release for their all-in-one.
That's right. They're sort of that. What is this? The $4,000 sort of like
it's called Digits.
Desktop?
Yes. And it was it said starting at, so we don't even know, it's not coming out till May.
Right.
But we don't know what the full. That's starting at 3,000. So who knows? But I imagine. But this is a full-fledged Apple computer with Apple OS, and you can have it today, essentially. And I'm like, this is what's really cool is, and again, what really gets me excited is the hardware part is cool, and I always will love that. But it's also, again, thinking about what people would start to do with these things. Again, it's the bicycle for the mind. Like where people go, what they do with it when they have this capability to do things.
We might
privately.
actually be able to run the latest version of Microsoft Word without it glitching.
I don't know if 32 cores.
What else would you want to do with this? But yes, I think this is really paving the way for, you might call it edge AI. I'm not sure, but basically being able to have AI systems that are localized rather than cloud-based or based on other servers.
Absolutely.
Somewhere.
And you start thinking about, quite quickly, I think you can get there when you start asking questions around privacy. Right. Yes. Like you have things that you do not want to leave a certain environment, and
as well, I know. So if you really want to push this out, you think about sort of sci-fi movies where people have their own sort of personalized AI assistant. Jarvis on Iron Man. But the idea now is you actually have a personal device that does 90% of the heavy lifting. This is your super intelligent sort of AI in a pocket. And then it just goes out to the web when it sort of loses its ability to do stuff locally. But most of the stuff can be done locally.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's, I use a couple local models. Here's some behind the scenes too for some production stuff. I will use, so it's an API and a model that comes out of OpenAI. It's Whisper. It's a transcription model. And you can put those, you have that run locally on your machine. So you can drop in videos or audio, and it's amazing what it does. And someone I was just reading something who also uses it was putting in a 2-hour long video or something, and it transcribes that using that model at 24x real time. Right. So a 2-hour thing gets done in like 5 minutes or something, with incredible precision. And so even just something as simple as that as a workflow thing is cool. But yeah, it's having your own Jarvis, having your own, and you start thinking, again, is where I start getting excited. When you start combining these technologies and these tools together, having these things at the edge or like in your home, you can start to see how some people may in the future be able to start having a competitive edge over other people because they're like,
they can actually get access to these,
and they can change things and they can modify things and not share that. And so, even if it's an organization, you might start to see this competitive internal, here's our version with our secret sauce versus, something else. So,
but very cool.
Very cool.
However, we should probably get on with the show.
We should. Someone needs I need a splash of cold water before.
Right. I'm gonna
cool me off.
Timer.
That's right. Yeah, someone's got to cool me off, man, before I'm like, I got a credit card in hand and I got the Apple page loaded right here. So
forget about the podcast. So that's all for this week. Sean's just off to buy some stuff.
That's right. We'll be back in just a few minutes as I enter in all that stuff. So anyway, we'll take a quick break. We'll be right back.
Initializing waveform.
Modulating signals for transmission.
Exploring the possible, probable, and preferable futures.
Welcome to Modem Futura. All right. So thank you, Andrew. You were able to talk me out of my last minute purchase. But yeah, so for those of you who are brand new to our show, want to say welcome. I'm Sean Leahy, and I'm joined with my impressive colleague, as always.
I'm not sure impressive, but Andrew Maynard.
Oh, yes. And that means this is Modem Futura, the show that explores the intersection of technology, society, and the possible, probable, and preferred futures, asking deep questions like, what does it mean to be human in the future? But I thought, the cold open aside, technology, there's a moment like today, I was just thinking about it. Again, when I was looking at those comparisons between, going back 30 years and looking at the jump that technology has made, and then just reminded, one, we are living in a very cool time. I mean, for computing, the jumps that we're seeing, I mean, it's been amazing, and the speed at which it's coming. And that speed only seems to be going fast. It seems to be accelerating even more.
Yes.
So much so. So also the timing happened too. We weren't lucky enough to be at South by Southwest this year. Mm-hmm. I've never actually been. I say that like I go there all the time.
Right.
Well, this year I didn't.
Missed it this year.
This year I didn't get to go. I've never actually been. Sounds like a great time though. But every year at South, well, I don't know every year, but every year for quite a few years now, Amy Webb, who is a quite notable and famous futurist who was the CEO of a company called Future Today Institute, and they just rebranded themselves. They're now the Future Today Strategy Group, I think. So that just happened like days ago. But on South by Southwest, Amy usually does a keynote, and during that time is when her organization drops their annual sort of trend analysis for technology for the year. And so without missing a beat, they did that this year as well. So just earlier in the week of I think it was like March 10th or something is when it actually happened.
Yep.
But anyway, the Future Today Strategy Group, we got to get the name right now, just dropped their 2025 Tech Trends report.
Okay.
This thing is a beast. So I will put the link of where you can go get it from their website. But it's over 1,000 pages long.
And my immediate thought is that 1,000 pages of human effort, or is this AI generated?
That's a good question. Quickly, should I do a quick Command F and look for the word delve and see?
Right. Yes.
I'm really going to do that right now. See how many hits we get.
Right.
None.
Or in summary.
Yeah. None. No hits for delve.
Okay.
Or people are catching on and putting like a find.
It well.
That's right. It's not hard in Word. Speaking of, not hard to do a find and replace.
Right.
So delve, remove. But so we're not going through 1,000 pages of their Tech Trends report. But often I think it's fun and interesting because also spring break, I don't know, this tends to happen to me a lot on times when suddenly things that like the routines kind of shift for momentarily.
Yep.
Things are quieter, the email's a little more tame. That's when I'm like, oh, you can start looking around and like, what's going on? And the other, it's like, you start doing this sort of.
So this explains all the stuff about the computers and Apple.
I'm like, what else?
If it wasn't for spring break, you'd not even know.
What else is happening? I'm like, oh, there's so much cool stuff. But the Tech Trends, I thought this was the timing was great too, because it is, I feel like one of those moments where we can kind of pick our heads up and look further around the horizon just to look at what is kind of happening as we think about all these changes, because we've talked at length before, and at some point I still want to do like a more of a deep dive into megatrends.
Sure, yes.
But there's so much happening. It's not just things in more traditional computing elements. It's things that are happening in geopolitical elements. It's biotechnologies. It's healthcare and medicine. It's space. It's all these things combined.
Right. And this is always what fascinates me. If you look at that area of emerging technologies, it's actually the stuff at the edges, the stuff that sometimes doesn't even have a name, where the really interesting things are happening. So what's on this list?
So I took the worst possible time to take a sip of coffee.
I was watching. Yes.
I was like, oh, I could feel the end of the sentence coming. I'm like, oh, I'm lucky I didn't cough and spit all over the microphone. But yeah, so again, we'll link the trend. It is filled with lots of great information, and also I'll link another article that comes from the Future Today strategy group as well, because there's also a blog post on how to use this, because it is, I mean, one, right, again, just the length of it. I mean, if you were to print this thing out, I mean, it's like I said, it's 1,000 pages.
Yes.
They go and they do lots of summaries, but then lots of deep dives, so you can see where they're kind of pulling these trends. And there's a lot of work.
And I'm assuming sort of at least one of the target audiences is investors here. So they want
leaders,
detail. Yes.
right? CEOs, leaders of organizations, decision makers, policy makers, right? And I will say too, like I don't know if I've mentioned it here before, but I always will have a special nod for Amy and this group, because actually I was a fellow with the Future when it was the Future Today Institute, and I actually I did one of my first official foresight training things as a fellowship stuff with Amy Webb. So it was really
excellent.
Yeah, so really cool. So and they've been good for many years of sort of freely publishing their methodologies and really giving back to the futures community also with the tools and things like that to really help broaden the field and the scope of future studies and futures and foresight, which I think is they've been such a great partner in those. So but I think what would be fun is I have a list from their tech trends of the 10 key takeaways from this gigantic report.
Okay.
So we'll go through them. I guess we'll sort of take them in order, I guess.
This is ChatGPT Sean summarizing everything down.
I won't do as good of a job.
Delve into it.
Let me delve into this. So one, I think this is the biggest hit, because I think I haven't compared their sections, but I'm going to guess the part of artificial intelligence is probably the meatiest bit here. But the first takeaway here is this idea of living intelligence. And I should say the trend here is always with sort of the time frame scope of about 5 years.
Okay.
So that's sort of, when we're talking about this, that's kind of the idea is over the next 5 years, these are sort of the trends that we're either seeing play out or expecting to see kind of mature in those pieces. But number one is this concept of living intelligence,
which we've mentioned before, but remind us what exactly this is.
So living intelligence is essentially this merger, and there's other. Amy and their team have also been talking about this particular element in connection with another term called I just lost it, a super cycle, which has more of an economic term, basically big hype cycles merging together to make this jumbos, it's like the Voltron of cycles.
Or a perfect storm.
Yes,
that's
right. They're multiplying themselves. But so living intelligence is really sort of this combination of where you have artificial intelligence, advancements in sensor technologies, and biotech.
Yes.
And kind of merging those systems together so that they can think, adapt, and evolve in ways. So the takeaway here is that in the next 5 years, really seeing this combination of this living intelligence really take form and take shape. And I think, as a trend, we're starting to see all these little different markers for that. And I think that's something really interesting to see how that these, again, the intersection of these things playing together will really have this transformative.
Yeah. And I'm fascinated to see how that plays out. So certainly we know that there are people working at those intersections. And one of our colleagues is doing work there, and I don't want to steal his thunder. But you are beginning to see people realize that there is really interesting and sometimes quite scary stuff when you begin to merge biology with these digital systems. And especially when you put AI on there. Either as a way of enhancing AI with the biological component or as a control component or goodness knows what. But it is a fascinating area.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And again, when you think about this, a lot of times when we talk about AI, we've been so focused on the generative AI platforms, right? But this is
But
bigger
the
than
reality is that the cutting edge of AI and intelligence-based research is so far beyond that.
Yeah.
So I was seeing recently, I think it was only in the last few days, that there's been sort of more work around sort of putting human brain cells on chips.
Oh, yeah.
So this has been this has been in the works for a while, especially with brain organoids. So these are these little clusters of brain cells outside the body, but they begin to show properties that are similar to sort of clusters of neurons.
Yeah.
And people have been working out how to put those into chips, so fuse them with digital technologies. The idea being that you can then extract the compute or processing power in very specific ways of biological entities.
Yeah.
And of course, this plays directly into that sort of living intelligence thing, that this interface or this merging between biology or biological systems, natural systems, and artificial systems, digital systems.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And that's, I mean, again, you see this mixture of that, again, this bioengineering and this
right, yes.
And then it's like, first of all, I have to ask, where do they get the brain cells for those things?
So, they ask for volunteers, they just sort of take it. No, they don't. There are many ways of culturing cells.
Okay,
yes. In fact, we probably don't want to go too far
probably
now, but it's legit.
Okay,
I believe.
But it is. I mean, that part is fascinating too, because I think as we again moving beyond, and I think there's been a lot of we won't maybe not today go into it, but there's also a lot of calls and speculation that the advancements or the return on more large language model generative AI is. We're kind of hitting some limits of where that it was never meant to, and never potentially will be this thing that is. And then again, coming back to this question or the challenge of cutting through the hype about AGI and all that stuff. Well, it's like, well, LLMs, no, the limitation.
We're looking at what comes after that. So yes, there's actually this huge debate about scalability, sort of that LLM architecture. How scalable is it? And people really don't know. You have experts who say that we're going to hit a limit at some point, but that limit is several years away. We can still carry on making these massively bigger and more powerful. And then others are saying, no, there are already indications that we're running out of steam here. So we need the next iteration of technology to push things along. Yeah,
no, absolutely. And I think it'll be interesting to see, because I think there's also this challenge, again, why you swirl in the factors of market-driven monetary incentives and things like that, where organizations may be very hyper-focused on the near term, cranking out new things that are in some ways more narrow, but then missing the boat on some of these, this bigger convergence that's taking place.
See, that's
and I think it's, I've written about this and talked about this for going back, years now, where it is that convergence of like physical, digital, and biological technology. Like, it's not going to be, there'll be this new discovery, then all of a sudden it's there. The most like it's all these small incremental
that's it
pieces, and then it appears as if it's one. I think someone once used the phrase too of like, it was a 15-year overnight success or something, right? It's like a 30, decades long overnight success, but you often don't see or notice as much those small
until it crystallizes together.
That's right, until it becomes this component that is suddenly you can't, you no longer can avoid. So. Okay, so that was one.
Okay.
We're never going to get through all 10 of these. So here, let's see. I'll be skip because this kind of talks a little bit about moving away from LLMs, which we kind of just talked about as well. Let's talk about robots for a second. So again, this is a trend that so this is the trend number 3 from the report. Robots finally break free from factory floors as advanced technology enables real world adaptability.
Yep.
So moving out of,
and so this is such an interesting space, especially with the humanoid robots. So to pass this out, when we talk about robots, you've got the somewhat traditional industrial robot, which is a robot that is designed just to do one task and do it well. And those have been around forever.
Right, like assembly line, right?
That's right. So they're incredibly good at what they do, but they're not versatile. And for many years, people have been talking about humanoid robots, and it's largely been poo-pooed by technical communities. They've said, why on earth would you build something that looks and behaves like a human when we can do specialized things?
Yeah.
But the thing is that a humanoid robot is adaptable. It's a general purpose technology. And it's only in this last 12 to 18 months that you've had companies with the audacity to start trying to make them. So, of course, Tesla were one of the first on the scene with their Optimus robot, but then you've had this whole range of other companies that have been getting in. So the company Figure is one of the really interesting ones now, where they actually have a commercial bot that they're beginning to sell for production lines. They're working with BMW on this.
Oh, interesting.
And the idea is, if you think about a car production line, these human-like robots, they can do pretty much anything on that production line that a human can do. This is where the versatility comes in. But then, of course, the aspiration is that these things move from industry and production lines into the home.
Yeah.
This is what all of these big companies are betting on.
Yeah.
And I actually think they're in for a big surprise. But if you're looking at investments, if you're looking at excitement, humanoid robots is where it is at the moment.
Yeah.
Huge thing.
Yeah.
The rubber hits the road when people start buying them and realize that there's nothing more creepy than having a human-like robot just sitting there in the corner.
I know. Well, I'm looking. As you're talking, I'm like, which one is the Figure one? And I'm like, oh yes. So it has like this glass black.
That's
face,
right. Yes.
That looks. It's like. And I'm wondering, like, could you project like a person's face in? It's unsettling, to be honest.
It is, but incredible excitement here. And then, of course, actually just backing off a little bit, because we've got to talk about it's Boston Dynamics. Isn't it? I always want to call them Boston Robotics. So they've been in the field again for a long time, creating. They're the ones that create these dog-like robots.
Yes.
So again, it's a general purpose robot, but not like a human, like an animal. So they've really been pushing the boundaries there, but not for home use, for security use, for military use.
Yeah.
So this idea of anybody being able to go out and buy their own robot is rather novel.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, I wonder too, right? So, and I think this was back when the show on Amazon, the Fallout, was on.
Mm-hmm.
I did a little. I'll see if I can find a way to share this, because I don't know if it would get taken down. But I had mixed they had just announced, Boston Dynamics had just announced, I forget what model number, but their humanoid version of these things. Again, it's pretty interesting looking. It's cool from a sci-fi, like you're cool robot, but you're like, I don't want that anywhere near me.
Right.
But then I had mixed it with this character from that show called Mr. Snip Snips, who's basically harvesting human parts, right? So it was pretty entertaining because it matches very well, and it's that character in that show is voiced by Matt Berry, which he cracks me up. So I'll see if I can find a way to share. I don't know if I'll be able to, but it is interesting because we have robots in the home in terms of, people have Roombas or whatever.
Yes.
And so many devices are robotic, but it raises the question, like, would you, this is my nightmare. The room is dark.
Yep.
It's, very early in the morning or something. And you just kind of awaken as you do sometimes.
Right.
And there is this blank, like slate human figure just standing at the foot of your bed.
Spooking you completely, yes.
I'm like, oh my God, that would be so freaky.
I can't imagine how anybody could get used to this. And of course, part of this is the idea of the uncanny valley.
Yes.
The closer these things get to being human-like, the more sensitive we are to how they're subtly different from a person.
Yeah.
And actually, I haven't heard that many people talking about the uncanny valley with this huge enthusiasm around humanoid robots. But I think we're going to discover that the thing that people thought they wanted but absolutely do not want in the home is a robot that looks like a person.
Yeah, that's and I'm trying to think of the name. There was a show, I should have looked this. I'll try to look it up right now. There was a show earlier this year on Apple TV Plus. I think it was called Sunny.
I know the program. I didn't see it, but I do.
Which is this whole concept, right? That it takes place in like near future.
That's it. Yes.
The story itself takes place in Japan, but that everyone has these like, personal home robots, but they're cute-ified. I don't know.
Right.
They have anthropomorphic personalities and features, but they're not humanoid.
Right.
They're like cylinders.
Yes, you're right.
But even that, you're like in the show, you can see the characters exploring that reaction of like, I don't want this. This is creepy, whatever. And then it has its own, it was entertaining.
Yep.
But even that still, I mean, there's a part where, and again, you can see this sort of divergence of a full robot And then I start thinking about all the assistive technologies that these robotics can perform for humans, right? So exoskeletons, things like, assisted, whether it be wheelchair mobility or what these new, what again, I get excited about, it's not today, but this mixture of robots and robotics and intelligence is increasing mobility.
It's a heady mixture.
Yeah.
I mean, so despite my cynicism about just the home robot, I think there are clear opportunities here, and just the technology itself is unbelievably exciting. So yeah, as you say, you've got cutting edge artificial intelligence, which is enabling things to happen that have never been possible before. So effectively creating a robot that can communicate with you just like an advanced AI communicates with you.
Yeah.
You've then got the mechanics of these things, which are just crazy impressive.
Yeah.
That mixture of sensors and actuators. These companies are learning at light speed how to actually refine their technologies to create not only that movement, but that strength. So for instance, if you look at certainly what Tesla is doing with Optimus, and I think you're finding other companies are doing this as well, just looking at the nature of the hand on this robot.
Yeah.
The human hand is incredibly complex, but also the strength we get in our fingers goes through the tendons that come all the way down the arm. You can't just put a little actuator in your little finger. It just wouldn't have the strength. So now you've got companies like Tesla and others beginning to create artificial tendons. So those fingers have got dexterity and strength.
Yeah.
So we're learning a massive amount. And to me, this means even if you don't have the home general help, you're going to find uses for these things that could be life-changing. And even, I know you mentioned sort of home help in different ways, but imagine now you're an elderly person who desperately wants to live in your own home. You don't want to leave it.
Yep.
You can't afford a human being to be there 24 hours a day, but maybe you could afford a robotic helper.
Sure.
With the practical things, how to sort of get you out of bed. If you have a fall, how to pick you up, how to actually maneuver around without having to be a burden to another person.
Yeah.
You can begin to see how it opens up the possibility for people to live the lives they desire.
Yeah, absolutely. And the only thing I would add to that too, from my perspective, I think, again, thinking about this excitement in terms of as the materials get lighter, stronger, we find ways to do this also of, again, restoring agency when it's been lost. Or, and this is all until we reach the escape velocity of aging at some point, maybe. But until then, we as humans, we will age until we'll complete the circle of life. But even then, we think about, because in other places, this is not in the tech report, but, these other claims, right, that as we continue to extend potentially the lifespan of humans, right? The question is, well, extending it isn't enough, that you need to extend it while also being quality. Because
that's it.
But so thinking about things like as you age, things that you lose, right? So stability, you lose, things. And so even you can, at least in my mind, you start to imagine these futures where you have these intelligent systems connected, where it's like putting on a pair of pants, but they have these sensors and these capabilities that are like, we can strengthen these areas or keep balance or warn or,
super pants. And anybody who is a Wallace and Gromit fan, you have to think of the wrong trousers.
Super pants. Oh my God. I walked right into that one.
I know. We should probably carry on with the list. But I think we're going to come back to this question about sort of humanoid robotics. Maybe not, maybe super pants. Who knows?
I would I would wear a pair of super pants. I'm just saying. I'd be happy to try on a pair of super pants. So moving on the list. Of course, agentic AI is on there. That's the number 4. Agentic AI systems that set their own goals and execute complex decisions, augmenting human expertise.
Yeah, which I think is good. So many people have been predicting this, and you've got people like Sam Altman saying 2025 is going to be the year of agentic AI. I think it may be a little longer before we have true agentic AI, but this idea that we have artificial intelligence that can problem solve with agency, it can work out how to solve a problem, and it has the means to be able to do that independently of a human allowing it to. Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think, again, this year, I don't think so. We're already almost halfway through it. Almost halfway through. It's March.
But by the time you do this, by the time we, it's almost June. soon. And, my whole thing on this is I'm like, show your work. Let's see the receipts on these things. But also coming back to that, so I think more of the 5-year time frame. Like, but this is where I get it again. I'm saying that a lot today. This is where I get excited. Clearly, I get excited at a lot of things.
Right.
But again, going back to our cold open, having an AI system on the edge and that being agentic, that is cool.
Yep.
That's right. Like, again, because you start getting into this privacy and the information, who knows what, how are these, because, a lot of it is, we don't know the back end, but having local control of something also, so you can turn it off if you need to, right?
You think you
hope. That's a different story. It was self-replication. But I mean, if you're using for example, if you're using a cloud-based system and you're I'm going to give you this task of, sell my car or sell my house. Like, I want to, or what was it? The example of somebody of like buying eggs or milk or something. Yep. And it was like, it paid like $400 for a carton of milk because it didn't, but, giving it these instructions, and I can see there being the first time I do it, I'm like, well, where's the kill switch? Right. If you're like, whatever it's doing on its own, if you're like, no, we have very quickly, I think we're going to find some alignment problems, like, very, very, you can't escape it, right?
Yes.
But again, having that edge-based thing or that private or the locally run system that can be agentic, that has a lot of potential power.
I think it's intriguing. So one of the things that I find fascinating with agentic AI, and of course there's a convergence here with the physical robots, because then you've got physically embedded AI, is asking, well, what will they do? And to be honest, if I just look at sort of my life, there aren't too many things that I would want an agentic AI to do. But you look at something like research and discovery.
Yeah.
Imagine you could run a research lab, say it's a drugs delivery research lab, and instead of having half a dozen grad students doing the work, you could have 100 agentic AI that are smart enough to create hypotheses, work out how to design experiments around those to test them. They actually have physical access to the lab space, so they can order chemicals, they can run experiments with the equipment there, they can analyze the results, they can write the papers. So this is an instantiation of agentic AI. It has the ability to do everything that somebody in the lab, a researcher in a lab, would do without human intervention. And you scale that up, think about the impact of that on research and discovery.
Yeah. No, I think, that's an incredibly cool potential. And also, extending that to just all the other systems where you have things that are highly repetitive or things where you're like, maybe the human could not do that repetitive task over and over because we're prone to make mistakes, especially with high level of repetition.
Right.
You make mistakes. And that's where machines, intelligent machines especially can excel
until we get to the point where they get bored. So this is
not going to do that.
This is the twist with AI, because we're trying to sort of find out what makes us uniquely human, and especially in terms of our ability to solve problems. But maybe boredom is part of it.
Yeah.
So maybe you can't have the perfect AI unless you factor in boredom. At which case it becomes a real pain.
Yeah, or it's going to cop some attitude and just be like, I'm not going to do that. No, that's not interested.
So actually, this is the 5-year future. You've got agentic humanoid robots that sit sulking in the corner because they don't want to do anything.
Get off your servo and get in there and do those dishes. I'm not going to do it today. I'm going to think about some other quantum problem. Blah
this
blah blah.
This is the future.
Oh my goodness. You'll have to have some built-in you're like, I'm yelling at my robot, yelling at things all the time. It's not just your Roomba now; it's going to be your humanoid. But that's the thing. What, it starts yelling back at you? I don't know.
Right.
The human we may get our strength from our tendons, but it's like you go up against hydraulics. You learn very quickly that you are not the strongest one in the room. Painfully, I think.
Yep.
All right, so let's move on. Number 5 was metamaterials.
Yep.
So rewriting physical limits as engineered substances transform how we build our world.
Yeah. So this this is a really interesting one because people have been excited about metamaterials for the last at least 2 decades, actually a lot longer than that if you look at the research. And the idea is these are materials that have got structure down at the nanoscale that give them different properties.
Yeah.
And they're quite often properties which allow them to interact with light and other forms of radiation in other ways, but they can also add to structure as well. And the secret of them is, if you think about sort of normal material, it's made up of stacks of atoms and molecules, but it's fairly solid.
Rigid.
Yes, yeah. And those sort of naturally, they go together in certain patterns. But if you could change the physical structure of how those go together, you can create materials with a wide range of properties, including materials. So this is one example which has already been used. If you look at antenna receivers, for mobile phones, other stuff like that, you can actually vastly increase their ability to pick up a signal by engineering those materials at this very, very fine scale to create these metamaterials that can actually pick up a signal very, very efficiently.
Yeah.
So there's a lot you can do with them, but people have been working on this for a long time now. So I'm interested to see whether this is the next 5 years where we're really going to take advantage of metamaterials.
Cool. I just think, going back to the Apple thing, you remember the antenna gate? You're holding it wrong, right?
Right, yes.
So if they had the metamaterial, but that's a big deal. Being able to change it. So when let me ask you this question, because this area, I'm not that, it's kind of outside of my realm. Does this also include like the category we used to refer to as smart materials that are like reconfigurable?
It can.
Or is this the base layer to then potentially those?
It's fluid.
Okay.
So basically, if you just think about sort of any sort of material where you can give it a structure that is a little above the structure you get from the atoms and molecules, and you can use that structure to give it functional properties. Some of that might be smart materials where they can reconfigure or they can sort of respond in certain ways, but really it's structure that allows them to interact with them in their environment in ways that you simply would not see just with the solid
with the object
itself.
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
So it does actually get really exciting, but it also means that you can do cool stuff with relatively simple materials. So this is going a little beyond metamaterials, but it sort of fits in here. You think about all of the concerns around rare earth metals at the moment, which are absolutely vital for all of the electronics we use. They're not called rare because they're rare. They're actually pretty abundant, but
they're hard to get. Right?
Well, actually, no. The rare is nothing to do. Well, they are, but it's nothing to do with that. That's a particular technical term. But if you look at sort of who controls the market, it's largely China. So this is a geopolitical issue.
Oh, sure. Okay.
But what if you could do exactly the same by engineering a material like carbon, which is abundant in ways that mimic these rare metals? And you can do that by configuring carbon atoms in very unique ways down at the nanoscale. So
that's really
some
cool.
people may call these metamaterials. Other people may just say it's really novel carbon chemistry and carbon material science.
Yeah.
But this ability to be able to stack together atoms in unique ways allows us to do things that we simply could not do before.
Yeah, that's great. At least until we can capture that asteroid. What's it, like the $40 quadrillion asteroid that's out there? I don't know.
And yes, rare metals will be incredibly abundant.
Yeah, something like that. I'm like, well, again, at that point, it's like there's a post-scarcity model. You have the unobtainium. You get the unobtainium.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, yeah, that's really. That's really fascinating because I for a while there, I was following some of the advancements in like the smart materials thing. Again, thinking about these structures how they would adapt to the individual user and things like that.
Yeah.
But you would imagine that capability would be boosted dramatically by having materials that have these special properties that might otherwise be, whether it's geopolitical or an actual scarcity of the, or materials that are, essentially only available from the lab that don't occur naturally because of different ways of bonding and all this kind of stuff.
And of course, I'm going to bring it back to sort of where we started with the first few things here. One of the ways in which we can actually discover and create new metamaterials is working with AI.
Sure.
Because it, in principle, allows us to identify material configurations that we would have never come across on our own.
Yeah, and set those agentic robots to like test these gazillion.
That's right. Yes. That's
one to this, one
that
to
is
that.
Exactly. Imagine you have this factory of 10,000 robots all trying different configurations of metamaterials.
Yeah. Well, it's like, what was that? I feel like, when you grow up, at least in school, we were always told, when Thomas Edison discovered the light bulb, it was like every experiment that didn't work. And you're like, well, with these things, maybe he would have found out like within the first week,
It's click of a finger.
No, tungsten. There you go. Use tungsten, you fool.
Instead of linearly trying sort of 999,000 times until you get to the one thing right, you do it in parallel.
Yeah, that's right. You're like, look at it. Like 10 minutes later, tungsten, you fool. Put some current on that and watch it glow.
Yeah. We're joking, but actually, this is one of the dreams of automation.
Yeah.
Yes, intelligent automation.
Yeah, and finally, and then here you just springboard from there, and you start adding in like the digital twinning, where it's like you can have these things, especially if they're dangerous.
Right. Like we're doing it all in virtual space.
Yeah.
Yes.
I'm like, all right, in perfect keeping of me butchering all kinds of quotes. I feel like is it a Ray Bradbury short story that ends or something with like, the last words spoken on Earth before it was annihilated were two scientists, and the one of them said, "Let's try it this way," and then, it all goes kaboom
plausible.
or something.
Yes.
I'll see if I can find where that. If anybody knows, even better, let me know. I'll throw it to an AI or to our audience, and someone tell me where that came from. Maybe.
Yep. Okay, we're on 6 now?
All right, yeah, we'll jump to 6. So tech giants forging unlikely alliances as AI demands
that'll never happen.
Rival. Hold on, what does this say? All of a sudden, I'm like, I need my glasses. So tech giants forging unlikely alliances as AI's demands force former rivals to share computing power and data.
Yeah.
Ask Microsoft and OpenAI.
I know.
About
yes.
that.
Yep.
And even there, right? It's interesting. So the more I've learned of late of that original partnership between is like. Also, that moving squishy target of an AGI has been identified as a dollar amount. So, like, once they can break out of this contract,
artificial general intelligence.
Yes. But they would, and I'm like, well, right now we're already seeing this, and perhaps even more as these. I'll be curious again, coming back to like what will be the outcome of the Stargate project or others that are like it, where you have several large players coming together to create these data centers. But that is a question that no one has really talked about, is like, okay, that spins up, who gets access to that? How do they get access? Like,
how is power shared effectively?
How is power, or is it not going to be? Is that the plan? I don't know. I think that'll be.
But I think that's an intriguing one. And I was actually wondering whether it was going to go as far as geopolitics with those collaborations between tech companies and sources of power and authority within society. Sort of governments and governments.
Yeah.
And in fact, we're already beginning to see that.
Yeah. And I think some of these, we can kind of chain these together because number 7 is around climate crisis.
Okay.
So climate crisis spurring rapid innovation as extreme weather basically forces people to start moving towards next gen technology adoption to either like save or prevent or and otherwise hopefully, reduce.
This is a really optimistic report.
I'm feeling very optimistic at the moment.
I thought climate change had been cancelled. I thought it was no longer a thing. Somebody signed an order and said no longer exists.
Well, it's called putting your head right into the sand, right? Like, there's nothing to see here as the world burns.
But I wonder, and actually, so you've read at least some of the report. I haven't, but does it go beyond climate change? Because there are so many sort of boundaries that we're pushing against on planet Earth or pushing past on planet Earth that this seems to be a forcing factor for all sorts of things.
Yeah. And I think this trend focuses on the technology perspective.
Yes, yeah.
But I think as we back out a layer,
as a driver of technology innovation.
Yeah, absolutely. And we know this. The other one that's not even on here is war. Right. Conflict. Historically, conflict is, you could probably even boil this down more reductively to humans. When life is threatened, we're capable of doing amazing things.
Right. Yes.
Right. Whether that is because the climate is taking them away, disasters are removing where we live, how we live, or if it's human on human violence through war and acts of, we know those are massive drivers for technological change.
But I wonder whether climate change is big enough. And the reason I say this is,
slow.
That's it.
Sadly, I think it's too slow.
Globally, we've been activated to do something about climate change for half a century or something now. And yes, we've seen advances in clean tech. And at one point, it looked like we were making really big advances. But it is haltering.
Yeah.
And it feels like it still isn't a big enough driver. And then you look at other forcing factors, such as biodiversity, such as chemical flows in the environment. And even to things such as antibiotic resistant.
Yeah.
So there are a whole bunch
scary.
of things where, as a global society, we are facing crises that we're going to have to work out how to innovate our way out of them. And I'm not convinced that the forcing factors are strong enough to get us to move as fast as we need to move.
Yeah. And I think there's always I think you hit it, because I think one of the biggest challenges with these is you can't argue that these aren't this isn't a challenge or a crisis that's coming.
Right.
It's where the incentive lies.
See, that's
right?
it. Yes.
And when and again, when you look at something like climate change, let's just take the last 30 years. Where is that felt the most? It's felt the most at the fringe of where those climate changes are felt. Like, you can't escape it when they're like, I've lost the floods have risen and now we've lost.
That's
my house is now underwater. That's big. You have now felt the effect of that.
So if I was to ask, sort of, how is this impacting the top 100 most wealthy people in the world? It'd
be a different story. Suddenly, we'd see some action, I think.
Right.
And I think that's always been some of the sadness of that is it's a slow moving crisis that for a long time you can ignore it for a long time for certain people until it reaches their doorstep.
That's it.
And then it becomes a crisis for them. But until that happens, I feel like this is a big issue.
And in contrast, you sort of brought up the idea of war and conflict.
Yeah.
The timescales are much, much shorter.
Yeah.
If your life is threatened, if your livelihood is threatened, if your family are threatened all on a daily basis or a weekly basis, you have the impetus to innovate and problem solve at an incredibly fast speed.
Absolutely. I think going all the way, just if you think back to, like, for example, World War II, right? A massive literal world war in that sense, but also what it did locally to industries. The entire economy was focused on the war effort in new materials, new ways of doing things, machine manufacturing. And so it was, I think, I'm not even going to attempt to try to do a quote that I can't remember all the parts to, but it's essentially, in some situations, it feels like you can advance a decade within weeks, in that sense, because so much there's such an incentive to push things forward.
See, that's it. If you look at there are so many examples with the emergence of radar, or what happened at Bletchley Park in the UK with cracking codes, and sort of so many other things. But it was because the driver was this imminent threat of not only loss of life, but loss of nation, loss of everything that a whole community considered
existential.
To be.
It was existential for that group, right?
Yep.
And speaking of existential risk, don't forget nuclear power, right? So coming along with it's hand in hand with climate crisis as well. But as power hungry AI things continue to have an insatiable appetite for power, we have to.
Yep. People are
we're
looking
compelled
back at,
to fuel it.
Yep.
So also looking into things like, how do you invest in smaller, more modular, safer
the SMRs, the small modular reactors, which are reactors that are actually sort of fully built on site and then transported out to where they're going to be used. So effectively, you're beginning to look at production lines for nuclear reactors,
which is cool. But then I'm like, show your work. What's the safety mechanism on these bad
I'm a
boys?
physicist, so it's cool. I fully bought into this idea that,
got one in the back
you could make radioactive stuff safe.
That's true. Total aside, it just reminded me, I'm like, I need to get my hands on a Geiger counter. I've got a cool, this goes back to camera.
Why?
I have a cool old camera. It's a darkroom timer, and it has a illuminated dial.
Oh, yes, with the radio.
And I don't know exactly what year it is.
Yeah.
I think it's safe, but I'm like, it sits on my shelf, and I look at it going, I wonder if that's radioactive. I need to see if it has radium in the illuminated dial.
Well, if it sort of glows all night,
Yeah, I
Yes.
should check. Okay. Oh, good. So I started getting superpowers sitting in my home office.
It's funny.
you know?
I'm sure I remember when I was a kid, I used to get these science experiment books out of the library. And at least some of those talked about trying to find an old watch with a luminous dial and scraping some of the stuff off and doing experiments with it.
Yep. Or because, what was that? I remember too the story of it was the women in the factory would get poisoned because they would lick if you do painting, the bristles get frayed, you want to pull them together. And so,
just lick the brush.
Lick the brush. But when it has radioactive,
and you really do not want that stuff in your body.
You do not.
Yep.
No. But yeah, so anyway, I need to get my hands on total aside.
Anyway, but nuclear reactors, was that number?
That was number 8.
Number 8. Okay, yes.
So number 9, this one is so big it's hard to even talk about, but quantum computing.
Quantum computer.
Yep. But the takeaway here is that in the short term, what we're going to is quantum computing reaching an inflection point where the error correction breakthroughs unlock some practical use cases.
Which is a smart way of putting it, because we're already seeing those possible breakthroughs, although they're a little contentious at the moment. But the error correction is the thing.
Yeah.
Because those little qubits, they're intriguing and weird and potentially very powerful, but incredibly unreliable. So you've got to work out how to factor out those errors.
Yeah. And if you can, all of a sudden that's a sit-up moment when things have changed. And I think I've got notes for we should do a whole episode at some point, but we need to pull some people in for that one, I think, too, to go into some of the quantum computing and some of the advancements that Microsoft has made recently on some of the new chips that's
right. But I did see there was an article in the journal Nature just the other day with somebody contesting their claims there.
Oh, good.
I think it was somebody that just had a bit of beef with Microsoft. Okay. But you don't know. This area is so hard to pin down.
This is where it gets exciting. You're like geek fight.
Right,
Let's take off the gloves. Everyone can get their robot, their agentic robot. We could have Rock'em Sock'em robots for real in a ring. That's a new one right there.
There we are. Yes.
No one needs to get their nose broken anymore in a boxing ring. We'll have these robots go at each other.
But I'm not into boxing, but I thought that was part of the point.
Yeah, well, maybe. But I'm also like, okay, here's a humanoid robot, battle bots where it's just like Cage Man.
So I've got to tell you this. I never understood Robot Wars when it was on TV because you just had these remote control things bashing each other up.
Spinning blades.
I know, zero intelligence. I wanted intelligent things. I wanted things that could actually strategize and work out how to take the other bot out. Maybe we're getting there.
Maybe it'll know enough to look at you just right before it does the finishing move, right? So which robot in the room has got the power. All right. Last one, which I like the way they did this one. This last one takes us out of the atmosphere.
Okay.
Private enterprising, colonizing cislunar. So the space, I had to look that word up. I was like, what does cislunar mean? It's the space between the Earth and the moon.
Yep.
So basically private enterprises colonizing this.
Yeah. Or sort of creating communities or whatever. Depending on whether you want to use the term colonize.
Yeah. That's probably out of
coming from a nation that sort of did a little bit of that.
Yeah. To be fair, their words, not mine.
Right. Yes.
But essentially, yes, establishing a new economy between the Earth and the moon.
Which is interesting, yes. So presumably they're talking about private space stations and stuff like that?
Looking for all... we already have an increasing amount of privatized space flight, but then also, thinking about space stations, communication, research, again, potentially even as a lot of potentially valuable giant space rocks go flying between us and the moon even.
Right. How many of those actually occur?
I think recently too, there's been a couple that were like, oh yeah, and one just went through recently and they're like, oh, it's now at a 1% chance of hitting us in 2035 or something.
I think the odds on that keep changing on a day-by-day basis.
Yeah, because now we can see it, right? But that's the thing, you want. And again, look at the moon, people. all those craters on there, they didn't start that way. It was once smooth. And those are just reminders of how close big rocks do come.
That was a few years ago.
Yeah.
Or billions.
Yeah. But still, it's a reminder.
But that's interesting. I'm intrigued to see how that actually works, because of course with sort of near Earth orbit satellite space, you've seen this explosion, especially with things like the Starlink satellites for internet and communication. I'm fascinated to see sort of how things move out. And of course, we're actually looking at the next 5 years when the International Space Station is going to be deorbited. So that's going to be out of commission. So I'm fascinated to see how fast you can get private space stations up there. I think it's going to take some time. Although there are consortia that are actually working on this.
Yeah. And I think, and I think that what we'll see, and I'm curious too, like what we'll see, in this report, they quote something out of the World Economic Forum that estimates that the space economy is estimated to be a 1.8 billion sort of room of commercial goods somewhere. And, and what does that mean exactly? I don't know.
Yeah. That actually doesn't sound that much, to be honest.
No, well, not when you see how much money, and there's no AI money in that apparently, because they're throwing around numbers that are much bigger than that. That's like pocket change for these AI
that'll pay
companies.
for 1% of Stargate.
No, I'm like,
less than 1%. It's it's about 0.2%.
They're putting in half $1 trillion into that thing, and we can only muster up 1.8 for this space economy. That seems like a bargain. But I think it'll be really, and that of course is you start getting into a lot of really fun sci-fi places when you get into that privatized space flight and things like that as well, that really start to come to mind.
And then somebody watches the movie Gravity and realizes just how fragile these systems are.
Oh my God, I can't talk about that movie. That one gets me. I don't know. I have issues with that one.
Sandra Bullock falling from space and surviving. I don't see the problem.
I guess, right? You just fall all the way down. But no, I think it'll be fascinating to see. But I think so. Going back and we'll wrap this thing up, because otherwise, I think
go on for a long time.
But each one of these things you can go on. But one of the things that's really cool with using, and I'll link the article that is some examples of how you might use a report like this. And this, again, this is not predicting the future whatsoever. And they do a great job of explaining that. What we're talking about, these are trends that might lead to bigger changes. They might lead to ways you can start, but being aware of them. And what's kind of fun, and so if you're thinking like, oh, this is kind of neat, and as you heard us go through these are not insulated elements. All of these are connected. And something that can be really fun is you could, like, even if these 10, take them, put them out on a board or on a table or whatever, and start and grab 2 of them together and just ask like, okay, so living intelligence and private enterprise for colonizing, for developing cislunar space.
I'm still stuck on the cis.
Yeah, I know. It's weird. It's a strange, I looked it up, and it's apparently they came up with this term. I don't know.
Yeah, at least it's not trans space.
Sorry, we're probably you're gonna get us in trouble now. But it's fun just taking these things like tech giants and robots and moving these things together and see how they interplay with each other, because you can start to see some really fascinating scenarios of really cool or scary outcomes. And that's part of it.
And actually, just on that point, and this is something that I emphasize with my students time and time again, you look at what tech entrepreneurs do. Tech entrepreneurs don't necessarily follow the trends. They look at those opportunities between the trends. What happens when you combine A, B, and C with D in a way that nobody else has done? That's the opportunity.
That's it. And again, bringing this full circle all the way back to the future of being human. We ask these questions: what will it mean to be human in the future? And then looking at these, again, take these and ask that question with robots in the home, with nuclear power. Like, oh yeah, everyone in their basement or whatever has a little. At this point, they have a pocket-sized nuclear reactor, right? Keeps you warm. You don't need a heater anymore either. What could go wrong? But you start asking those questions again, like what does the future look like when these things either come or combining these things together?
Yes.
So you're looking if these are, I'll use the space metaphor here. These are all asteroids. And if these things come together, what happens? Maybe they don't join.
Or do you hit critical mass?
Yes. Do they join? Do they smash apart? And what new things are created when these things have their moment and then fall apart.
Right.
And so again, the endless sort of scenarios that you can come out of this is a wonderful mind space to start
I agree.
thinking and challenging, and also finding, again, if you're a young, entrepreneur, or you're thinking about like, what am I going to be when I grow up? Maybe there's something in between all these things that doesn't even exist today that could be the next thing that solves all of our climate crisis, and we can all go happy. So,
Okay.
All right.
Great place to finish.
Let's
yes.
finish.
And we actually got through all 10.
We did.
Yes.
We made it.
Yep.
But yeah, this is a great spring break episode for us just to sit back.
It is, and I distracted you for an hour before you're tempted to go off and buy that
You
Apple Bling.
saved me.
Right.
Thank you. That's awesome. Well, and like I said, I'll stuff as much of this as I can into our show notes, so you'll know exactly where to go to get a hold of this trend report yourself. And also, there's links. You can watch Amy's South by Southwest talk where she gives this as well. So, Andrew, thank you. This is a great way to spend spring break.
Same here, Sean.
And thanks for listening, and we'll see you all on the next episode of Modem Futura.
See you there.
Demodulating signal.
Modem Futura is a production of the Future of Being Human initiative at Arizona State University. Be sure to subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to your favorite shows. To learn more about the Future of Being Human initiative and all of our other projects, please visit us on the web at futureofbeinghuman.asu.edu.
End transmission.